The spotlight blazed sharply on Jasmine Crockett as she sat poised across from Tucker Carlson in the familiar blue and red expanse of his Fox News studio. The air seemed charged even through the television screens of millions tuning in nationwide. Just moments before the broadcast went live, Tucker leaned toward his producer with a self-satisfied whisper. "Watch me dismantle this progressive congresswoman with facts she can't handle," he said. Smirking, the producer nodded, expecting the usual scripted humiliation of a Democratic guest. But Crockett, a first-term representative from Texas with a prosecutorial past and a razor-sharp legal mind, had come prepared for something Tucker could never anticipate. She had spent the previous night combing through federal crime data, highlighting statistical truth so precise that they had the potential to turn his own narrative against him. As the cameras clicked on and the broadcast began, Carlson's furrowed brow and skeptical grin faced off against Crockett's calm, measured demeanor. The topic: crime rates and their alleged connection to immigration policy. Tucker had been hammering this argument relentlessly, constructing a narrative that Democratic policies were the direct cause of a so-called nationwide crime wave. It was familiar territory for him, a talking point he wielded with practiced ease, but Crockett had already identified a single, decisive statistic that would unravel that narrative completely. Tucker leaned forward, his opening salvo prepared and confident. "Congresswoman Crockett, welcome to the show," he began, his tone a mixture of feigned courtesy and sharp intent. "Let's start with a simple question. How can your party continue to defend the border policies that have fueled a surge in violent crime across our cities?" Crockett allowed herself the slightest nod, a faint, controlled smile appearing. She wasn't here to react or flinch under Carlson's famed interrogation techniques. She was here to flip the narrative on its head, armed with a single piece of incontrovertible evidence, a statistic that would leave the host momentarily speechless and challenge the talking points millions of viewers had heard from him over weeks. The studio atmosphere thickened with anticipation. This wasn't merely a cable segment. It was a collision of fact versus rhetoric, a moment destined to circulate and ignite debate across every corner of social media. Tucker, confident in his domain, was about to confront a guest who had spent years preparing for precisely this kind of challenge. Carlson had built a media empire on questioning progressives, with a blend of skeptical expressions and rapid-fire interrogation, cultivating an audience that spanned millions nightly. His studio persona, tie sharply knotted, suit impeccably fitted, posture rigid with authority, radiated control. He had spent years perfecting the art of dominating interviews, turning political debates into compelling television drama. "Democratic politicians have told us," he began in his familiar cadence, "that open borders and lax enforcement make us safer. Tonight we welcome Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who continues to champion policies that many Americans believe are directly linked to the rise in crime in their neighborhoods." The on-screen banner flashed. "Crime crisis. Are progressive policies to blame?" The framing was explicit. Tucker intended to corner Crockett into defending unpopular positions while he dictated the narrative. But Crockett was no ordinary guest. A former criminal defense attorney and state legislator before her congressional election, Crockett had faced down hostile judges and skeptical juries with precision, logic, and composure. Her reputation in Congress as a rising progressive voice was paired with an understated legal tact. She approached policy debates the same way she did courtrooms, armed with data, ready to dismantle flawed arguments point by point. "Thank you for having me, Tucker," she began, her voice steady, measured. "I'm glad we're discussing crime statistics tonight, because there's a great deal of misinformation circulating on this subject." Behind her calm exterior, Crockett had spent hours preparing for this confrontation. Her staff had compiled reams of research, but she distilled it down to a single devastating number. A statistic that could not be spun, misrepresented, or dismissed. This was more than a cable debate. This was an opportunity to correct a narrative weaponized against her party for years, and she intended to do it methodically, with evidence as her ally. Tucker launched his opening line, confident in the familiar rhythm of debate. "Congresswoman, violent crime is surging in major cities across the nation. How do you justify supporting policies that clearly aren't working?" Crockett's smile returned, small and precise. The trap had been set, and Tucker had unwittingly walked into it. His questioning intensified, his tone sharpening as he sensed Crockett was not adhering to the usual defensive script. "Congresswoman, FBI data shows violent incidents climbing in cities with progressive prosecutors and sanctuary policies. How do you explain that correlation?" Crockett leaned forward just enough to convey focus. "I appreciate your reference to the FBI data, Tucker," she said. "I've reviewed those same statistics carefully. Tucker's eyes narrowed, detecting a hint of deflection. "Numbers don't lie, Congresswoman," he interjected, a challenge in his tone. "Exactly," Crockett replied, her voice gaining clarity and authority. "Numbers don't lie. Which is why I want to highlight one specific statistic from the source you just cited." The tension in the studio began to shift. From the control room, producers noted her composure. No defensive quivers, no hesitation, just measured delivery. Tucker attempted to redirect. "The overall trend is still what matters," he pressed. "The overall trend is exactly what I want to address," Crockett interjected, firm. "Because within the FBI's uniform crime reporting, there is one statistic that completely contradicts the narrative you've been presenting." Tucker's brow furrowed subtly, the first flicker of unease passing over his face. His usual tactic, rapid-fire questions to control the rhythm, was being neutralized by Crockett's methodical precision. "Before I share this number, let me be perfectly clear," she continued. "This isn't a statistic from a progressive think tank or a Democratic study. This comes directly from federal law enforcement data. The very data your network has referenced countless times." Tucker leaned back, an unfamiliar hesitancy creeping into his posture. "Go ahead, Congresswoman," he said, the edge of caution entering his voice. Crockett opened a prepared folder and produced the evidence. "According to the latest comprehensive FBI data," she announced, "violent crime rates in the 10 states with the highest immigrant populations are, on average, 21% lower than states with the lowest immigrant populations." A hush fell over the studio. This was not a minor quibble or an interpretive debate. This was a direct factual contradiction to the narrative Tucker had been reinforcing for months. "These aren't my numbers," Crockett clarified, sliding a printed graph across the desk. "These are FBI statistics, analyzed by the KO Institute, hardly a partisan liberal organization. They show clearly that states with larger immigrant populations consistently experience lower violent crime rates than states with fewer immigrants." The camera caught Tucker glancing down at the chart. His usual rapid-fire response slowed. The control room buzzed as producers scrambled to feed him talking points. But the statistical precision Crockett deployed left him momentarily disarmed. "That may be one way of interpreting the data," Tucker said finally, his voice less assured. "But many factors influence crime rates beyond immigration patterns." "Exactly my point," Crockett replied without missing a beat. "That's why the oversimplified narrative blaming immigrants for violent crime collapses when confronted with the actual evidence. And there's more." The tension escalated. Tucker's strategy, dominate the conversation, speak over guests, move swiftly from point to point, was failing. The control dynamic had shifted. Now he reacted to Crockett, rather than dictating the exchange. "If we examine violent crime trends over the past decade," she continued, pulling out a second document, "the data shows violent crime falling by 32% in sanctuary counties, compared to 27% in non-sanctuary counties." Tucker's jaw tightened. His carefully constructed segment was unraveling. "And these statistics," Crockett added, her confidence growing, "come from studies conducted by the Libertarian KO Institute and the conservative-leaning Center for American Progress. This isn't a partisan argument, Tucker. This is reality." Tucker looked to the camera, then back at Crockett, searching desperately for a counterpoint. The confrontation had reached a critical point. What had begun as a routine segment was now a moment of undeniable factual clarity. The crime narrative he had built with months of careful framing was being dismantled, piece by piece, by a first-term congresswoman armed with research, preparation, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. The producer's voice came through high earpiece. "Push back on methodology. Question the time frame." "Look," Tucker began attempting to direct. "We can cherry-pick statistics all day, but Americans and cities across this country are experiencing—" "This isn't cherry-picking, Tucker," Crockett interrupted, her voice firm, but measured. "This is the comprehensive FBI, Uniform Crime Report data spanning the last decade. The same source Fox News cites regularly." She tapped the document in front of her. "And there's one more critical number here that directly addresses the central claim of your recent segments." The camera zoomed in on Crockett as she revealed the statistic. She had been building toward the knockout punch prepared specifically for this moment. According to federal crime data analyzed across all 50 states, she stated clearly, looking directly at Tucker, "Immigrants, both documented and undocumented, are 65% less likely to commit crimes than native or American citizens." The number hung in the air between them. Not 5% or 10%, but 65%. A differential so significant, It couldn't be dismissed as statistical noise or a minor trend. The control room erupted in urgent whispers as producers realized the segment was veering far off script. Tucker froze momentarily, his trademark furrowed brow deepening. The statistic was devastating precisely because it came from the very sources he regularly cited. His mouth opened slightly, then closed, the characteristic rapid response failing him. C5%, Tucker Crockett repeated, letting the numbers sink in. That's not a liberal talking point. That's from a comprehensive study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, analyzing federal crime data across all 50 states over a 20-year period. The camera caught Tucker's expression, a mixture of surprise and discomfort, unfamiliar to regular viewers of his program. He glanced down at his notes, searching for a counter that wasn't there. I've actually brought copies of the full study, Crockett continued, sliding a document across the desk. I'd be happy to discuss theme methodology in detail. Tucker finally found his voice. Studies can be misleading, Congresswoman, the reality on the ground. This isn't one study, Tucker, Crockett countered instantly. This is a meta-analysis of every major crime study conducted by government agencies in the past 2 decades, and they all show the same pattern. She leaned forward slightly. The narrative connecting immigration to crime isn't just misleading. It's demonstrably false. According to all available empirical evidence, the studio fell silent again. What viewers at home witnessed was unprecedented. Tucker Carlson, master of the interview ambush, found himself cornered by irrefutable statistical evidence that contradicted the core narrative he had been advancing. I think viewers deserve to know these facts, Crockett added, her voice now carrying the authority of someone who had conclusively proven her point, especially when so much of our immigration policy debate is being driven by fears that the data simply doesn't support. Tucker attempted to pivot once more. We're running short on time, but I understand time constraints, Crockett nodded. Which is why I focused on just one statistic that summarizes the reality. Immigrants commit crimes at rates 65% lower than native-born citizens. That's not politics, Tucker. That's fact. The director signaled urgently from off-camera. They needed to cut to commercial. Tucker, recognizing defeat in this exchange, nodded stiffly. We'll have to leave it there. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, thank you for joining us. As the camera pulled back, viewers nationwide witnessed something few had ever seen before. Tucker Carlson outmaneuvered on his own show, unable to dispute a statistical reality that had just shattered one of his program's central narratives. The triumph was complete, captured in high definition for millions to see. Within minutes of the segment ending, clips of Crockett's statistical takedown began spreading across social media platforms like wildfire. The most viral clip, titled, "Crockett Silences Tucker with One Statistic," reached 1 million views on Twitter within the first hour. Progressive accounts shared it with captions like, "Watch Tucker's face when he realizes he can't dispute facts." While political commentators from across the spectrum weighed in on the significance of the moment, by midnight, the hashtag gestures, Crockett's 65% waist trending nationwide, referencing the devastating statistic that had left Tucker visibly speechless. Morning shows were already booking segments to discuss what many were calling the most effective takedown of Tucker Carlson's career. Media analysts noted the remarkable nature of the exchange. What made this different? Explained media critics Brian Stelter on CNN the next morning. Wasn't just that Congresswoman Crockett came prepared with facts. It's that she specifically chose statistics from sources Tucker Carlson couldn't easily dismiss. Federal crime data, conservative think tanks, peer-reviewed research. She essentially used Tucker's own playbook against him. On MSNBC, Joy Reid dedicated her opening segment to the confrontation. Last night, we witnessed something rare in political television, the power of an undeniable fact to stop a narrative in its tracks. Jasmine Crockett didn't just win an argument. She exposed how certain talking points completely fall apart when confronted with empirical evidence. Even some conservative commentators acknowledge the effectiveness of Crockett's approach. On the Bulwark, Charlie Sykes wrote, "Whatever your politics, there's a lesson here about preparation and precision." Crockett didn't attempt to win with rhetoric alone. She came armed with specific, indisputable statistics that directly addressed the core claim being made. Tucker's show the following night notably avoided any mention of immigration and crime, pivoting instead to culture war topics. Social media users quickly noticed the shift with comments like, "Guess Tucker is not talking about immigrant crime rates tonight. Wonder why?" garnering thousands of likes. For Crockett, the aftermath was transformative. Her office reported receiving over 5,000 supportive messages within 24 hours of the appearance. Donations to her campaign surged, with over 500,000 flowing in from small donors nationwide. Cable news bookers from every major network flooded her staff with interview requests. More significantly, the exchange had demonstrable policy implications. 3 congressional representatives who had been wavering on upcoming immigration legislation cited Crockett's statistical evidence in statements explaining their decision to oppose harsher restrictions. The data Congresswoman Crockett highlighted deserves serious consideration, noted a moderate Republican from Michigan, signaling how the factual corrective was reaching beyond partisan boundaries. Democratic leadership recognized the strategic value of what Crockett had accomplished. Within days, a memo circulated among Democratic congressional offices outlining the Crockett method, preparing for hostile media appearances with focused, undeniable statistics rather than broad talking points. Representatives should identify the singular statistic that most directly refutes the opposition's central claim, the memo advised, and build their response around making that number impossible to ignore. Media coverage expanded beyond the initial confrontation to examine the deeper implications of the statistics Crockett had presented. The Washington Post ran a front-page analysis titled, "The 65% Gap," examining the disconnect between immigration rhetoric and crime reality, while The Atlantic published a feature on how fear narratives survive despite contradictory evidence. Perhaps most tellingly, conservative media outlets began subtly shifting their framing on immigration issues. Rather than abandoning the topic entirely, many pivoted to economic or cultural arguments, noticeably avoiding the crime-based framing that Crockett had so effectively dismantled. 2 weeks after the confrontation, a Gallup poll registered a 7-point shift in public opinion on whether immigrants increased crime rates. A remarkable movement in such a short period on an issue where opinions had been relatively fixed for years. For Tucker Carlson, the moment represented a rare public defeat, but true to form, he never acknowledged it directly on his program. Behind the scenes, however, producers confirmed that the show had implemented new protocols for vetting guests and preparing for statistics-heavy discussions. The most lasting impact came 6 months later, when the congressional record showed the exchange being cited during floor debate on a comprehensive immigration reform bill. Senator Amy Klobuchar referenced the now-famous 65% statistic that Congresswoman Crockett brought to national attention while arguing against amendments that framed immigration restrictions as crime prevention measures. What began as a single television confrontation had evolved into something much more significant. A masterclass in how prepared factuality could overcome even the most entrenched narratives. Jasmine Crockett had done more than wean a cable news exchange. She had demonstrated how a single perfectly deployed statistic could change the course of a national conversation. In political communications offices across Washington, staffers began asking a new question when preparing their bosses for contentious interviews. What's our 65% statistic? It was perhaps the most fitting tribute to a moment when data precisely deployed had proven more powerful than any talking.